I never thought the moment that would change everything would begin with a knock on my door on my birthday. For most people, birthdays come with balloons, laughter, a cake topped with candles. For me, it came with an eviction notice, signed by my father. I'm Rachel Dawson, and what I'm about to share isn't just a story about real estate, legal documents, or family finances. It's about invisible labor, unacknowledged love, and learning to reclaim the space you've earned, even when the people closest to you want to write you out of the picture. But before we talk about what I did next, you need to understand how I got here, because the betrayal didn't start with a letter. It started with years of being dependable, years of being the one who held things together so tightly that no one noticed she was unraveling. This story is for anyone who's ever felt like the emotional glue of their family and yet somehow the one left out when decisions were made. If you've ever been the one people relied on but forgot to invite the one who sacrificed silently while others got the spotlight, then stay with me. Because in this story, the quiet one doesn't just find her voice, she uses it to change everything. Let's begin where it all unraveled with a birthday cake, a knock at the door, and the moment I realized I was done being silent. I had always loved quiet birthdays, the kind that didn't need a crowd to feel special, just a few thoughtful touches that made the day feel yours. That morning, I hung up pale blue streamers, the same shade my mother used every year when I was little. I wore the soft cotton dress she once called your color, and I poured her homemade lemon punch recipe into a glass pitcher, floating slices of orange and sprigs of mint like she used to. I wasn't expecting a parade. I just wanted a moment that felt remembered, whole, safe. By noon, the sunlight had spilled across the wooden floors of my apartment, dancing on the frosting of a vanilla cake from my favorite bakery. 33 candles waited to be lit. A tiny moment of stillness hung in the air, and then a knock at the door. For a second, my heart lifted. Maybe it was Dad. Maybe he hadn't forgotten. I opened the door with a smile that hadn't reached my face in months. And there he was, my father, Robert Dawson. But instead of a smile or a gift, he brought a white envelope and a look I'd only ever seen in boardrooms, not birthdays. I need to talk to you about something important, he said, already stepping inside, not even glancing at the balloons or cake. I offered him punch. I offered warmth. But he declined both. This is a formal notice, he said, placing the envelope beside my untouched cake. You have 30 days to vacate the apartment. It took me a moment to even process what I was hearing. Dad, what are you talking about? This is my home. He cleared his throat, eyes scanning the room, but never landing on me. Technically, it's still part of the Dawson family trust. Vanessa and I have decided we're giving it to Mark. He's moving back next month. It wasn't just the notice, it was the timing. My birthday. The fact that he called it a business decision, that he didn't acknowledge the streamers I'd hung with my own hands, that he didn't say happy birthday, standing there with candle wicks still clean and untouched. It hit me this wasn't just a mistake. It was a message. I was no longer part of the family equation. And yet, even in that heartbreak, a strange calm settled. Because 6 months earlier, when his business teetered on the edge of collapse, I had quietly stepped in. He had no idea that the mortgage on the Dawson family home, the one he thought he'd refinanced, was in my name. I'd saved it, silently, fully, without applause. Sometimes betrayal isn't loud. It comes in formal letters and hollow birthdays. But sometimes the best gift isn't the one you unwrap. It's the one that reminds you how far you've come. That moment didn't just shatter something. It woke something. I didn't know it yet, but that knock at the door didn't end my story. It opened the door to a new one. And to understand why my father's betrayal hurt so deeply, you have to know what came before the promises I made, the years I gave, and the sacrifices no one seemed to remember. Let me take you back to where this really began. When my mother passed away, I was 16, and overnight I stopped being just Rachel. I became the stand-in for a mother, a partner, a planner. My younger brother Mark was only 11, and my sister June had just turned 8. My father, devastated and unprepared, coped the only way he knew how, by burying himself in work. Each morning, he left early with dark circles under his eyes and a silence that lasted long after he came home. And so without ceremony or conversation, the weight fell to me. I started waking up an hour earlier to pack lunches, braid June's hair, and remind Mark to bring his soccer cleats. I learned to cook without burning dinner and got good at saying we're fine when well-meaning neighbors asked how we were doing. My college brochures gathered dust on my nightstand as I worked part-time at the local diner, then spent my evenings helping Mark with math or sewing buttons onto June's dance costume. I told myself it was temporary, that once things settled, I'd catch up on my dreams. But temporary has a way of turning into years. When I was 21, I had saved just enough to start night classes at the community college. I'd skipped parties, double shifted on weekends, and tucked away every tip I earned. I remember standing in the bank line with nervous excitement, only to be told the account had been emptied months before. My father had used it to keep the firm afloat, and when I confronted him, he didn't apologize. He just said, "Rachel, I thought you understood. Your job at the firm is your future now." That was the first time I truly understood how invisible sacrifice could become. The meals, the rides, the care, they weren't seen as acts of love, just expectations met. I wasn't the child who gave up her dreams. I was simply the reliable one. Dependable, predictable, silent. There's a strange kind of grief that comes not just from loss, but from being erased inside the very story you helped hold together. And still I stayed. I made new savings goals, I helped June apply for scholarships, and proofread Mark's first internship application. I wasn't trying to be a martyr, I just believed that one day it would all be recognized, that being the backbone of our family would mean something. But in families like mine, the one who holds everything together is often the first one left out. It's not that they meant to forget, it's that I made it too easy not to notice. And yet, through every missed milestone and quiet night walk, where I wondered if anyone truly saw me, I kept going. Because somewhere deep inside, I believed that if I just kept giving, eventually someone would say, "Thank you." They never did. But as I would later learn, sometimes acknowledgement doesn't come from others. Sometimes it comes from the courage to rewrite the rules yourself. That realization didn't happen overnight. It built up slowly over years of being passed over, overlooked, and eventually replaced. And that story starts with the woman who entered our lives just as my place in it began to disappear. Her name was Vanessa, and her smile, though warm, never quite reached her eyes. The first time I met Vanessa, she brought a pie. Apple cinnamon store, bought wrapped in cellophane with a gold ribbon. "I heard this was your favorite," she said, though I'd never mentioned it. It was a small gesture, polite on the surface, but something about the way she looked at me like I was a wild card, a complication, put me on edge. She smiled with her teeth, not her eyes. Her words were warm, but they landed cold. Vanessa was polished. Sleek blonde hair, neutral tones, and curated charm. She was a commercial real estate agent who met my father while helping him scout a satellite office that never came to be. Soon after, she started showing up at family dinners with imported wine and stories about her travels. She laughed easily with Mark complimented June's ambition and offered to spruce things up around the house. At first, I told myself I was just being protective, holding onto old spaces Mom had filled, but that feeling, the slow erosion of belonging, wasn't imagined. It was intentional. The changes started subtly. The floral curtains Mom had sewn disappeared, replaced by beige drapes that let the light in. Family photos were moved into drawers. The garden, a patchwork of wild color my mother had cultivated with love, was stripped down to drought-resistant shrubs. Vanessa called it minimalism. I called it erasure. I once walked into the house and found my mother's hand-painted ceramic dishes boxed up in the garage. "They're a little outdated," Vanessa had said lightly. "We want a cleaner aesthetic for the open shelves. She said we, like my father and her, were the only voices that mattered. And perhaps to them they were. Over time, she stopped pretending to consult me. Renovation plans happened without my input. Sunday dinners, once a ritual of casseroles and card games, turned into catered meals where I was seated at the far end of the table, if I was invited at all. Slowly, subtly, I was being removed from the narrative of my own family. But the most painful part wasn't the curtains or the cabinet dishes. It was the way my father let it all happen. He didn't protest when my mother's piano was moved to the garage. He didn't speak up when Vanessa suggested clearing out the clutter. He watched the history of our home being stripped away and said nothing. That silence hurt more than any insult. Because in families, distance isn't always created by harsh words. Sometimes it's made of gentle exclusions, quiet nods of agreement, and the absence of resistance. I realized something then: not all harm is loud. Some of it comes wrapped in beige tones and polite smiles. Some of it happens when people stop seeing your memories as sacred and start calling them dated decor. I didn't say much at the time. I told myself there would be a moment to speak, a moment when I could explain why those dishes mattered, why that garden mattered, why I still mattered. But that moment never came. And eventually, Vanessa didn't just redecorate our home. She redefined who belonged in it. And one summer afternoon, that message became unmistakably clear when the entire family went on vacation and forgot to tell me. There was a time when the Dawson family group chat buzzed with life memes from Mark. Pictures of June's latest art project, reminders from me about birthdays, or who was bringing what to Thanksgiving dinner. It wasn't constant, but it was enough to feel like a tether, a small digital thread tying us together. Then slowly it quieted. At first, I told myself we were just busy. Mark was in college, June was juggling internships, and I was balancing a demanding job and a life I barely had time to call my own. But even busy families still reach out, still remember, still include. Until one day, that silence spoke louder than any message ever could. I found out about the Florida trip from Instagram, a photo of Mark on a beach holding a pina colada, June laughing beside him in sunglasses I'd never seen, my father in the background, arm around Vanessa, smiling like it was the most natural thing in the world. I stared at the screen for a full minute, heart pounding, waiting to see if I'd somehow missed a message, an invite, a heads up, anything. There was nothing, not even a text. I waited a day before I asked. June replied casually, "It was last minute. Vanessa found a great deal. Mark said we didn't think you could get away from work." My father? He didn't say anything at all. That trip wasn't just a vacation, it was a verdict. A confirmation of what I'd been too afraid to admit. I was no longer part of the inner circle. Somewhere along the way, my quiet reliability had become a reason to exclude me, not include me. I wouldn't complain. I wouldn't cause drama. I'd just disappear. I went back through old messages that night, scrolling months into the past. My last text about Father's Day dinner, left on read. The meme I'd sent in March, no reaction. Birthdays, achievements, announcements, they had moved on without me like I was a chapter they'd outgrown. There's something uniquely painful about being left out by the people you never imagined would forget you, especially when you've spent your whole life making sure they never felt alone. It's like showing up to a play you've been rehearsing for your whole life, only to find out the script changed and no one thought to tell you. And yet, even then, I didn't speak up. I didn't fight. I just swallowed it the way I had swallowed so many quiet hurts before. But that moment planted a seed, one that would take months to grow through every overlooked conversation and empty birthday until I couldn't ignore it anymore. Because you can only be invisible for so long before you start questioning whether you were ever really seen at all. And then came the moment that would force everything into the light, not a betrayal of words, but of silence and of signatures. The moment I learned our family home, the one I was secretly saving, was being sold behind my back. It started with a phone call from the bank, a woman named Brenda Hayes, polite but urgent. "We've been trying to reach Mr. Dawson about the mortgage on the Oak Street property," she said. "We're now several months behind, and foreclosure proceedings are scheduled to begin within the next few weeks." I felt the breath catch in my throat. My father hadn't mentioned anything, not even a hint. And yet here was the truth laid bare by numbers and deadlines. I asked for the details. Brenda hesitated, but I explained I was his daughter, that I'd been helping informally. Eventually, she relented. The debt wasn't 3 months behind like my father had once offhandedly mentioned over dinner. It was 7. The house, the one filled with memories of my mother's laughter, of home-cooked meals and Sunday puzzles, was weeks away from being lost. That night, I didn't sleep. I paced, cried, then pulled out a legal pad and started working through the numbers. I had savings money I'd quietly built through years of budgeting and saying no to vacations, new cars, and sometimes even new shoes. Money I had hoped to use for my own down payment, my own first home. But how could I let my family house be taken by strangers? So I called the bank back. "What are the options if I assume the mortgage?" I asked. Brenda explained the steps carefully: credit checks, income verification, legal documents. It would require full transfer and new terms. I took a breath and said, "Let's begin." Over the next 2 weeks, I met with bank officers, gathered paperwork, and signed documents that would quietly shift the weight of our family home onto my shoulders. My father never knew. I told him the bank had created a special forbearance program for small business owners in hardship. He didn't ask for details. He seemed relieved to believe in a lucky break. In truth, I paid off the arrears from my own account. I became the mortgage holder. On paper, he still owned the deed. But the power behind the property, the payments, the risk, the protection, was all mine. I didn't do it to gain control. I did it to preserve something I thought we all still cherished. I told myself I was being dutiful. I told myself I was protecting him. But deep down, maybe I also wanted to believe that if I saved the house, I could save the family with it. What I didn't realize then was that you can't save people who are already writing you out of their future. And I would learn that lesson in the most unexpected, painful way when I stumbled across a real estate listing for my childhood home, the one I was still paying for. It was a quiet Sunday morning when the betrayal arrived, not in words, but in pixels. I had been scrolling through local real estate listings out of habit, curious about the housing market. That's when I saw it, a familiar front porch, the old brick steps I used to sit on with a popsicle in hand, the same navy shutters my mom painted herself the summer I turned 10. There it was, our house, my house, listed for sale. The agent on the listing, Vanessa. I clicked through the photos in stunned silence. The kitchen had been staged with white marble accents and fake lemons in a bowl, no sign of mom's ceramic canisters or the little notes she used to stick on the fridge. The garden had been stripped bare, replaced with gravel and boxwoods. Even the living room had been altered beyond recognition. It wasn't just that they were selling the house, it was that they'd already started erasing us from it. There had been no conversation, no call, no email. I was still making the payments, still carrying the weight, but apparently that didn't qualify me for a heads up. My hands trembled as I zoomed in on the price, ambitious, bold, confident. Vanessa's confidence, no doubt. She saw the house as a business asset, something to flip, not something to honor. At that moment, something inside me shifted. I had tried to protect the home with quiet sacrifice, believing that eventually someone would recognize what I had done. But all I'd done was make myself easier to overlook, easier to exclude. That real estate listing wasn't just a transaction, it was a declaration. I was no longer part of the family's plan, and they had no idea that the plan they were setting in motion couldn't happen without me. You see, legally, the mortgage couldn't be satisfied, or the house sold without the mortgage holder's consent. And that person was me. I could have stormed over that day, demanded explanations, threatened legal action, but something in me whispered, wait, watch. Let them show you who they really are. And they did. The following week, I received an invitation to Sunday dinner. No mention of the listing, of course. Just a casual let's catch up text from Dad, as if the past 6 months hadn't happened, as if I hadn't discovered they were planning to sell the house I had saved. But this time I wasn't walking in as the quiet daughter in the background. I had a folder in hand, a calm voice, and the kind of power that didn't need to shout. Because when they tried to sell our family home behind my back, they didn't just open an escrow file. They opened a door they couldn't close again. I arrived exactly on time. Not early enough to seem eager, not late enough to seem dismissive. I wore a navy pantsuit, the same shade as our old shutters, simple, firm, quietly unshakable. In one hand, I carried a portfolio. In the other, nothing. No bottle of wine, no dessert, just the truth I'd been carrying for months. Vanessa greeted me at the door with her usual airy tone, Rachel. How lovely you could make it. I nodded politely. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. My father didn't stand to greet me. We have a lot to talk about, he said, already halfway back to the dining room. The table was set beautifully, catered Italian candles, chilled wine, all carefully presented. Everything that is, except the truth. Dinner began with small talk. Mark's graduate program, June's new job, not a single mention of the house, not one word about the listing I'd seen with my own eyes. It was only when tiramisu was being served that Dad cleared his throat. So, Rachel, he said lightly, have you started looking for a new apartment yet? We'll need the Oak Street unit for Mark when he returns. I set down my fork. Actually, I said, voice calm, I wanted to talk about the house first. I saw the listing. It's a very compelling presentation, Vanessa. You have a good eye for staging. Silence. My father blinked. Vanessa's fork froze midair. I just have one question, I continued. Before you finalized the listing, did you confirm the status of the mortgage? You know who actually holds it? My father glanced at Vanessa, who shifted uncomfortably. The bank will handle the mortgage at closing, she replied too quickly. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out the documents, the mortgage transfer, the payment schedule, the confirmation of my name on every page. I laid them gently on the table like place settings. I'm the mortgage holder, I said softly. The house cannot be sold without my consent. There was a moment where no one breathed. Vanessa's eyes darted across the pages, her lips tightening. My father looked pale. What is this? He asked. When did this happen? 6 months ago, I said. When the bank called about the foreclosure, I paid off the debt. I've been making every payment since. You went behind my back, he snapped. I stepped in when no one else did, I replied, still calm, to save the home. Not to hold it hostage, but to protect what matters. Something I assumed we all still cared about. Mark leaned forward, eyes wide. Wait, Rachel, you've been paying for the house this whole time. I nodded. It was Vanessa who broke first. This is ridiculous. You're using this to gain control to manipulate the situation. No, I interrupted gently. I'm using it to remind you that I exist, that my voice matters, that you don't get to erase me from the home I helped save or the family I've spent a lifetime holding up. There was no yelling, no plates broken, just stillness, a shift in the air. That night didn't end in resolution, but it did end in reckoning. For the first time, the balance of power was visible. And I wasn't invisible anymore. But that dinner wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a conversation I had waited my whole life to have, one that would redefine what family meant and what I was finally ready to demand in return. The hours after that dinner were quieter than I expected. No angry texts, no panicked calls, just stillness. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one left spinning. I was the one holding the center. It felt unfamiliar, powerful, but not in the way I thought power might feel. It wasn't revenge pulsing in my chest. It was something deeper, clearer, realignment. The next morning, I sent a text to my father. I'm available to discuss next steps. But I won't participate in any conversation where my voice is optional. I didn't hear back right away, but when I did, it came with a surprising shift. Not just in tone, but in posture. My father came to my apartment alone without Vanessa carrying a manila envelope and a quiet expression I hadn't seen since I was a little girl, asking him for help with math homework. We sat down. I listened. He spoke. We didn't agree on everything, not even close, but there was space this time. Space for me to say what I needed, that I wanted acknowledgement, not permission. That I would no longer accept being sidelined from decisions that impacted my life, my finances, and my history. The conversation didn't fix years of hurt, but it proved something vital. Boundaries don't destroy relationships, they clarify them. So often we think strength is retaliation, that standing up for yourself has to mean pushing others down. But what I learned in those days following that dinner is this real strength is quiet. It doesn't scream. It doesn't need to be cruel. It simply refuses to shrink. I laid out my terms, not demands, but truths. I wanted 3 things: acknowledgement of my role in saving the house, inclusion in future family decisions, and a fair financial arrangement if the house were ever to be sold. Reasonable, measured, long overdue. My brother Mark surprised me the most. Honestly, he said, "You've always been the one holding things together. It's time that counted for something." Even June, who had often followed where Dad led, began to soften. "I think I let convenience win over fairness," she admitted. "You deserved better, Rachel." It didn't all change overnight, but something had shifted. And that shift would ripple outward in contracts and conversations and in a growing recognition that I was no longer the one they could take for granted. Vanessa, however, was a different story. Because when you realign the rules of a relationship, not everyone adjusts. Some people walk away when they realize they can't keep controlling the story. And walk away she did, but not before making one last pitch for funding for Favor for Power. What she didn't expect was that the answer this time would be a quiet, unwavering no. Spring came early that year, the kind of spring where the air smells like second chances and the sunlight feels a little softer than you remembered. I stood on the back porch of the house, my house now holding a packet of tulip bulbs and a trowel worn smooth from my mother's hands. It had been nearly a year since the day I was handed an eviction notice on my birthday, and somehow I was still standing here, still home. The garden was in ruins when I returned. The vibrant roses my mother nurtured had been replaced by drought-tolerant shrubs and sterile gravel. Her raised beds, once overflowing with mint and marigolds, had been stripped bare. It wasn't just a landscaping choice, it was a quiet erasure of her presence. But I hadn't fought to save this home just to let her memory be paved over. So I rolled up my sleeves, dug into the dirt, and began to restore what mattered. Every seed I planted felt like a sentence I never got to say. Every bloom was a conversation between the past and the present. I found her old gardening gloves tucked in the shed, still dusted with soil, and cried over them, like they were a letter she'd left just for me. It wasn't about flowers, it was about grounding. About choosing not just to own a house, but to belong to it again. That spring, I hosted a small gathering, a rebirth party, as my best friend Taylor called it. No formal invites, just laughter, homemade lemonade, and a cake made from Mom's favorite recipe. Mark brought his new girlfriend. June drove in from her new city job. Even Dad came holding a small package wrapped in the kind of blue Mom always used for my gifts. Inside was a photo I'd never seen before, Mom and me in that very garden, laughing as we planted tulips together. I must have been 10. She looked so alive, so sure. I found it while going through her albums, Dad said quietly. I thought, maybe it belonged here. It did. That moment didn't erase the years of being overlooked. It didn't fix everything between us, but it rooted something new, a beginning grounded in truth, not pretense, in seeing each other as we are now, not just as we once were. Because sometimes healing isn't loud, it's a hand in the soil, a framed photo, a father showing up unsure but willing, and a daughter who finally stopped asking for space and simply took it. And as I watched the guests gather beneath the string lights in the garden she once loved, I realized something. I had kept my promise, not just the one I made to my mother to protect the family, but the one I hadn't known I needed to make to myself, to stop shrinking, to take up space, to bloom. And what came next was the quiet legacy that grew from that very soil. This part is for you, the daughters who pay the bills in silence, who remember everyone's birthdays but wake up to no messages on their own. The ones who show up first, clean up last, and are rarely in the family photos, because they were the ones taking them. If you've ever felt like the emotional glue holding your family together and somehow the first to be left out, you're not alone. We're taught that love looks like sacrifice, that good daughters don't complain, that showing up quietly is more admirable than speaking up boldly. And for a while, I believed that too. I thought that if I just kept giving, kept steady, eventually someone would notice. That one day, I'd be invited into the room where decisions were made, not just asked to tidy it up afterward. But life doesn't reward invisibility, it forgets it. The hardest lesson I had to learn was that boundaries are not punishments. They are a form of care for ourselves, for the next generation of daughters who might otherwise grow up believing their value is measured by how little they need. When I took back the mortgage, when I reclaimed my mother's garden, I wasn't just fighting for property, I was fighting for a place to exist fully as a daughter, yes, but also as a woman with a voice, a past, and a future. If this story resonates with you, I want you to ask yourself something simple but powerful. Who are you when you're not holding everything together for everyone else? And are you ready to let her breathe? Because that's where your story starts, not with revenge, but with realignment. Not with pleasing everyone, but with honoring yourself. And if you've made it this far, you're already halfway there. So here's to you, the daughters who keep the lights on. May you finally sit at the table you've been setting for everyone else. And may your light, soft, steady, and strong finally shine back on you. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been the one holding it all together quietly? What did you learn when you finally let go? Leave your story in the comments. I read everyone. And if you found strength in this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to know they're not invisible. Because sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truths. And today those truths finally got to speak.